This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Here's a question I've been asking myself as I watch U.S. courts try to figure out what to do about 238 men who got shipped off to El Salvador without so much as a hearing. Is the U.S. just doing black sites now? So I called up Jonathan Blitzer, who covers immigration over at The New Yorker, and I put this question to him.
I don't think that's an exaggeration.
Little refresher here. A black site is defined as a clandestine detention center for prisoners who are being held without due process.
The U.S. is accusing people of a crime, or not even a crime specifically, of an identity that they are not presented with evidence of and that they're not allowed to contest. And then they're being summarily sent to a place in El Salvador where, yes, they are effectively being held in a black site. So, I don't think your formulation is off the mark. I think it's exactly what's happening.
The Salvadoran detention facility that's received these people has been called a mega prison. It's known as CCOT.
CCOT is the acronym for what in Spanish translates to the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism. And this is a prison that was built in the middle of this so-called state of exception because the Salvadoran government was arresting so many people. They needed more jail space. It is a black hole for certain. I mean, there is no entry point for people from the outside.
The strange thing about the fact that it seems like the Trump administration is operating this black site in El Salvador is that I think of black sites as things you want to keep secret and don't talk about. And this administration is doing the opposite of that.
Here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all,
This administration is sending Kristi Noem down to El Salvador to this prison where we have sent hundreds of people and having her pose in front of a whole bunch of folks behind bars with shaved heads.
I also want everybody to know if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face.
There is a kind of joining of forces here between the United States government and the government of El Salvador around cracking down on immigrants generally, but specifically playing up this idea of gang violence and of, tough law and order style crackdowns.
Do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility...
There are certainly fearsome looking people in that facility at CCOT. And so that, of course, that's the group that they have posing behind her as she, flashes her $50,000 Rolex and so on.
You know what struck me about the group posing behind Kristi Noem? They all looked alike. They'd all had their heads shaved. They were stacked up on these bunk beds that seemed to go up to the ceiling, which was quite high. It was hard to distinguish individuals. And to me, that seemed like part of the point, to make these people into something less.
I mean, what makes this all so complicated is, some of the people in that prison are gang members, are Salvadoran gang members. There's no question. No one's contesting that. The idea that I find so frightening and so upsetting is that both the Salvadoran government and now very much so the U.S. government are sort of gleefully mixing into those populations people for whom there is zero evidence of criminal association or activity. And so to your point, what you start to see is this sort of slippage between, someone who didn't have a criminal record, who didn't have any demonstrable association with any criminal gang, is now in a place where there are people who fit that description. And so I think very much the political hope is that the wider public at a certain point just starts to associate all of these people into one undifferentiated mass. And that, whatever outrage we're seeing now will dissipate as a result.
Today on the show, we're going to fight that instinct to see these prisoners as an undifferentiated mass. Instead, we'll tell you two stories of people trapped in El Salvador and ask, is there any way out? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is a great way to discover the best new styles and elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. The great thing about Saks.com is that it is always open 24 hours a day, which means you can browse from the comfort of your own home. Saks makes it really easy to find your favorite brands, and they offer amazing style inspiration. I'm not exaggerating when I say my jaw dropped at the shearling leather biker jacket I found. And that's not even mentioning the Alice and Olivia sequined mini dress I had my eye on. Whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and you want to elevate your personal style, head on over to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration. For the last 2 weeks, my listeners have been hearing about these flights full of alleged gang members that took off from Texas. Despite a judge's order that they remain in the U.S., they ended up in El Salvador. We've been hearing just scraps about the people who were on these flights, who they were. You decided to dive really deep into the story of one man in particular, Andre Jose Hernandez Romero. He's 31, Venezuelan.
Yes.
And he's been detained since he arrived in the U.S., right, in August? So tell me Andre's story. Why is he claiming asylum?
The situation that he's claiming asylum from is one in which he has been targeted while working in Caracas, in the capital of Venezuela, both for being gay and for not being a partisan of the country's authoritarian regime. And so he worked at a state-controlled television station as a makeup artist and was repeatedly harassed at the station. On one occasion was slapped by his boss in front of his coworkers. When he would leave his office, for example, at the end of the day, armed vigilantes who were associated with the presiding regime would follow him home and make threats and intimidate and menace him.
That's terrifying.
It's utterly terrifying. And he eventually, returns to the small town that he's from and tells his parents that he's going to leave for the United States. And they beg him to stay precisely because, as dangerous as the situation may have been in Caracas for him, the reality of traveling to the United States by, foot is incredibly daunting. So his parents begged him to wait, and he felt like he couldn't. And so he made this journey. And when he arrives for his appointment, they inspect him for anything that could seem suspicious. And specifically what U.S. border agents are looking at are things like tattoos, which the U.S. government has traditionally viewed with great suspicion because there are all kinds of assumptions that tattoos would somehow signify, gang membership or criminal activity. The reality, of course, is that huge numbers of people in Latin America and all over the world, obviously, have tattoos.
I was going to say huge numbers of people have tattoos, period.
Absolutely. And, more than anything else, what having a tattoo reflects is maybe your generation, your personal style, your socioeconomic class, but it does not correlate reliably in any sense. And you can ask any expert on this, whatever their political bent. It does not correlate really with gang associations or criminal proclivities.
And I want to just highlight something here, which is Andre crossed the border and was inspected in this way while Joe Biden was president. This is part of how people were received when Joe Biden was in charge. Yeah?
Yes, and I'm glad you make the point, because this is just a basic fact of what U.S. border administration consists of. But they see on Andre's body, he has 2 tattoos, one on each wrist, of a crown. And on the crown on each wrist is the word mom and dad. And the government has a list of tattoos that they believe are associated with Venezuelan gangs, and in particular, one Venezuelan gang that is very poorly understood in the United States called Tren de Aragua. And it is assumed that a crown tattoo suggests some sort of association with the Tren de Aragua gang.
Why?
I think, it's actually kind of interesting to track how the government has gotten this so wrong. I'm not privy to exactly what the intelligence gathering is. But I have seen some government files. And what they seem to indicate is that in the past, they have encountered people who are members of a gang. And those people, by chance, happen to have tattoos. And the government then tries to extrapolate based on the tattoos they've found on individuals who they do think have criminal associations to become this kind of incriminating feature of anyone they encounter at all at the border.
But correlation does not equal causation, my friends.
Yes, that's right.
So Andre has these tattoos, and he's arrived at the border. He does an interview where the U.S. immigration official he speaks to did think he had displayed credible fear of persecution in his home country, right?
Right. Andre passes that screening, but remains in detention because the government doesn't know what to make of these crown tattoos. I have his immigration file, and there's no reference anywhere in that file to anything beyond the fact of these 2 crown tattoos. And included, by the way, in those documents is Andre's repeated insistence that he has nothing at all to do with any gang of any sort, for which he's described in these same documents as being, quote unquote, uncooperative. And so he eventually gets a lawyer to represent him who organizes the fact pattern of his case and gets his documents and so on and files an asylum claim on his behalf. And he and this lawyer, who are in touch regularly, are waiting for a court hearing when, out of the blue, he gets transferred from San Diego to South Texas. And when he's transferred, his lawyer is not alerted in advance. This is a very common practice of ICE, but especially now. And so they can't quite make heads or tails of why he's been transferred. Now we all know why he's been transferred. It turns out that during that early period in March, before the president signed a proclamation putting into effect the Alien Enemies Act, people, Venezuelans in federal immigration custody who were being held all across the country were basically being moved stealthily to South Texas, where they were basically being prepared for eventual deportation under the Alien Enemies Act.
To get on these planes that were eventually sent to El Salvador.
That's right.
It's interesting. You've talked about the fact that with Andre, the only thing that seems to mark him as someone the government would be concerned about is these tattoos. And the government has basically said for people like Andre, who seem to have no criminal history, that an absence of criminal history actually highlights the risks people pose, which is this weird, twisted logic. It's a trap, essentially. Like pointing to people and saying, see, well, obviously, well, then they're sleeper agents. It's really wild.
There's no way to rebut that. There's no way around that. That's basically an argument against evidence of any sort. And so, but to be clear, I mean, that's not even the most radical thing the government is saying in some of these court filings. The government is also simultaneously saying, we owe you, a federal judge, zero explanation of what our logic is. We owe you, the judge, no evidence, no explanation, no basic information about who these people are, when we deported them, under what terms we deported them. This is all being done in the name of national security. The president has wide latitude to make these decisions, both in the name of national security and in the name of immigration enforcement, and that the courts don't even really have any sort of fair, legitimate role to play in adjudicating this issue.
You know, Andre has become a real symbol of what's happening right now with immigration. Like, there are a ton of pictures of him online. And he looks very non-threatening. He's holding up makeup brushes. You know, it's really underlining the fact that he's a gay man. And looks pretty different than how you might think a gang member might look. But I wonder, how does Andre's family or his attorney feel about all this attention that's been focused on him in this moment?
It's a really complicated situation, and I've spoken to his attorneys about this at great length, because they're in a terrible bind on his behalf. They can't speak to their client. They can't know what he wants. They can't kind of parse aspects of his situation to gauge, what is exposing of him, what isn't, what level of exposure he's comfortable with. He's being held incommunicado in a jail in El Salvador, and at the same time, if his identity is in any way obscured, or if he falls out of the news, there's a real risk that he's forgotten about. And so you have his lawyers thinking, okay, if we say publicly that he's gay, if we say that he's a gay makeup artist, which, again, really makes highly unlikely the claim that he's a hardened gang member from Tren de Aragua, are we then putting him at risk of abuse, harassment, torture in this Salvadoran prison because of his sexual identity? Eventually, they had more and more conversations with Andre's family. And Andre's lawyers told me that was one of the things that was kind of most important in their thinking, was basically hearing Andre's mom say to them, do whatever you have to do to get my son out of this prison in El Salvador.
I know you've spoken to Andre's family directly. They've pointed you to videos they've put out there, videos that already existed of Andre in his hometown. What do you see of him when you speak to people who know him, watch videos of him?
Yeah. One of the most stunning facts of his situation is that these crown tattoos that have become such objects of suspicion are actually readily intelligible and immediately understood to people who know him and to most of the people who live in his hometown of Capacho in Venezuela, which is they are a reference to a local celebration that is a source of great communal pride for Three Kings Day. And so there is an elaborate tradition in the town of Capacho that celebrates this holiday with really major fanfare. And so Andre is mostly known among people in this community, and most of what you see on social media is him participating in this local festival. He designed costumes for the dancers involved in the festival. He played a role as one of the main characters in the theatrical production that the community puts on. And so you see him. I mean, I think the most bracing immediate thing you see on the social media posts is you see him in a crown, in a ceremonial crown associated with Three Kings Day. And so I think when you talk to people about him, the first thing they really express is just a sense of utter bafflement and shock. I mean, I've spoken to friends of his, I've spoken to family members, I've spoken to people who worked with him in this Three Kings festival, who, all described his passion, his enthusiasm. They've all known him since he was a boy. There have been regular vigils in the town of Capacho, with residents turning out with signs. They have turned out wearing the garb associated with this festival, all to try to reinforce this sense that he is a source of local pride. There are really heartbreaking videos of some of the people associated with this theater festival appealing directly on social media to Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, begging him to release Andre and saying he's a great cultural talent. All of this stuff comes through, and it's just gutting, because there is a very plain injustice being done, and there just seems to be so little interest in rectifying it, even though all of the facts are right out in the open.
After the break, another story from this Salvadoran prison about a man who even the Trump administration admits was imprisoned by mistake. So why won't they bring him back?
Add a little curiosity into your routine with TED Talks Daily, the podcast that brings you a new TED Talk every weekday. In less than 15 minutes a day, you'll go beyond the headlines and learn about the big ideas shaping your future. Coming up, how AI will change the way we communicate, how to be a better leader, and more. Listen to TED Talks Daily wherever you get your podcasts.
Meme coins have no intrinsic value. They're a cryptocurrency that people trade because they're fun, or because other people will buy them. That's how a lot of people, including the Trump family, end up making millions off them. Anybody can make a meme coin, and anybody can get rich off them, at least in theory. So we figured, why not try it ourselves? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, host of What Next TBD. We made a meme coin hoping to hit it big.
I think you look no different than any other person who tries out, like, some of these meme coins, you know?
What we found was that behind the scenes, the game is pretty rigged.
Because it's just unregulated gambling, right? Like, this is the equivalent of, like, going to an illegal gambling den.
Check out our glorious failure. Listen to What Next TBD and our episode We Made a Meme Coin wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey there, Slate listeners. This is Felix Salmon of Slate Money. You have been looking at the price of eggs. I have been looking at the price of eggs. And basically, Slate Money has now become a delivery mechanism for the greatest segment in Slate Money history, which is Egg Watch. Pretty much every week these days, we bring on the great Shana Roth to talk about eggs.
Where I live in Michigan, eggs are currently about $5 a dozen, but at a tiny little grocery store in Bay City, Michigan, where my parents live, they reported to me that they got eggs for $2.75 a dozen.
What?
Or what is idiosyncratic about the egg supply chain? They don't vaccinate their chickens against the flu. Whether you're a human or a chicken, you should have a flu vaccine, but the chickens don't get their flu vaccines. So follow Slate Money and join us every week for Egg Watch, along with all the rest of the latest business and finance news of the week, wherever you get your podcasts.
Another detainee in this Salvadoran prison, who you may have heard of this week, is named Kilmar Abogo Garcia. Unlike Andre, Kilmar is actually from El Salvador, which is part of why his detention at CCOT is problematic. I called up Nick Miroff, a reporter at The Atlantic who broke Kilmar's story, to tell me more. Nick says part of what's surprising about Kilmar's situation is how the government itself is talking about it.
Yeah, this is the first time that the government has acknowledged making a mistake. They said in the court filing Monday that he was sent back to El Salvador as an administrative error. And the reason they're saying that is because he had a legally protected status known as withholding of removal. And it basically meant that an immigration judge had decided that he didn't deserve asylum or legal residency in the United States, that he was, deportable. He had arrived illegally, but that he would more likely than not face harm if he were sent back to his home country.
Which he just was.
The government was not supposed to send him back there and did so.
So tell me how Kilmar got on this plane anyway.
Well, he, according to his attorneys, he was picking up his 5-year-old son after work on March 12th when his vehicle was pulled over by ICE officers. They waited a few minutes for his wife, who is a U.S. citizen, like his son, to arrive and to take care of the boy. And then they took him into custody. Within 2 days, he was already at a ICE deportation staging facility in South Texas. That's incredibly quick. And he spoke to his wife and told her that he thought he was being sent back to El Salvador. 2 days later, when the president of El Salvador released these images of all the Venezuelan deportees that Trump had sent back under the Alien Enemies Act, she recognized her husband among the newly arrived prisoners with heads shaved and their heads being, forced down to the ground by these Salvadoran guards. And so his family has sued in Maryland federal court trying to get the government to bring him back. And so it was on Monday that we saw for the first time the government acknowledging that it says it made a mistake. But the government is saying, the Trump administration is saying that it's not going to try to bring him back, that the court has no jurisdiction to compel that, that he's essentially out of their hands. And then on top of that, they're saying, oh, by the way, we know he's a gang member, even though he doesn't have a criminal conviction in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, Kilmar's actually been in the U.S. since he was 16 years old. Can you tell me a little bit about who he is, how he got here, who his family is?
Yeah, he came to the United States at age 16, crossing the border illegally, as far as we know. His brothers were already living here, and so he joined his family. And a lot of the controversy stems from a 2019 incident in which he was standing outside of a Home Depot in suburban Maryland,
probably trying to get work.
Yeah, looking for day labor. And a local police detective pulled up, was looking for, was conducting some sort of investigation, and took him into custody along with a couple other guys that he really didn't apparently know. And as part of that process, they were trying to get him to give up information, and he said he wasn't part of the gang. He didn't know any gang members.
Though he was not charged with any crime during that brush with police in 2019. Kilmar did get placed in federal immigration custody, and his family had to fight hard to get him out.
The government said that a confidential informant had told them that he was a gang member. And so as part of those proceedings, he was ordered deported. His appeal was denied, and he was held in custody. But his family got an attorney and started an asylum case, arguing that if he were sent back, he would likely face harm because he had fled El Salvador because of gang threats to his family.
Okay, there's an irony there that he fled El Salvador because of gang threats to his family, and now in the U.S. he's being accused of being part of a gang.
That's right. That's right.
Part of your reporting, I believe, was that the cops who arrested Kilmar at this Home Depot raid, they didn't even believe the assertion that he was a gang member. They were like, oh, that guy's just saying stuff.
That's right. They were never able to establish that he was a part of this gang. The confidential informant had said that he was part of a group from MS-13 called the Western Cliques that is active in Long Island, a place where he has never even apparently set foot. So there were a lot of problems with the way that he was labeled an MS-13 member in 2019, sufficient at least that this, he was able to win his case in October 2019. He received this withholding of removal status, protecting him from being sent to El Salvador. And as far as we can tell, there was nothing, and the government hasn't said that there was something that he had done differently, since this 2019 incident. They seem to be basing their case for his gang affiliation on this confidential informant's testimony from 2019.
That people did not believe.
And that people didn't believe, and there's been no evidence introduced around this in a court of law.
I want to focus on something a little personal about Kilmar, which is that he has a 5-year-old, right?
That's right.
Who's pretty disabled, has hearing loss, and is autism. Is that right?
Yes, that's, as his lawyer stated in the court filing, his son was born with a birth defect, and so he's not verbally communicative and is disabled. That's right.
I mean, I'm a parent. It's hard when a parent goes away and your child is not disabled. I just can't imagine the impact this is having on his family, in addition to all the fear and everything else, when he wasn't supposed to be deported anyway.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly traumatic. His wife has told attorneys and others that it's been devastating for the family. He has 2 stepchildren as well. One can only imagine what that family must be going through, knowing that he's in this situation and there's no clear path to getting him back to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the administration has really dug in. You see J.D. Vance, the vice president, on Twitter, tweeting about your reporting and basically saying, why is a journalist like this more sympathetic to a gang member than other people? I'm curious if you care to respond to that kind of allegation.
I mean, I don't see it as a question of sympathy or not sympathy. And obviously, people who are whose families, whose loved ones are victimized by, violent criminals deserve all our sympathy, and those individuals, deserve to face justice. I don't think anyone's questioning that. In this case, I think we as reporters are right now sensitized to the possibility that the government, in order to deliver on some of its political and rhetorical goals, is moving quickly and sloppily, and is overstepping the law, as we're seeing in a lot of these court rulings against the government, is potentially, overreaching and overstepping the law, and is, running the risk of, committing injustices against people that didn't do anything wrong.
What's the next step for Kilmar and his family?
Yeah, I think the next step is to see how the court responds to the government's statements, and whether there is any, it does try to assert some ability, if it sides with Abrego Garcia's family, some ability to try to compel the government to take steps to bring him back.
How would a judge even do that? I guess a judge could order the government to bring him back. And then the question is what the government does next?
The Trump administration is saying that the court cannot order the government to bring him back. And so his attorney is asking the court to ask the government to request his return. And so, what we saw from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt yesterday was that they do not intend to do that, to ask for his return. But is that something that the court would be able to, direct the government to do? I think it remains to be seen.
Nick, I'm really grateful for your reporting. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Anytime.
Nick Miroff is a staff writer over at The Atlantic, and he covers immigration. You also heard from Jonathan Blitzer in this episode. He is a staff writer over at The New Yorker and the author of Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here: The United States, Central America, and the Making of a Crisis. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go say hey on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.